Generative AI has revolutionized the way developers write code, turning AI coding assistants into an essential tool for modern programming. Writing code without relying on an AI coding assistant has become as unthinkable as driving a car without a GPS in an unfamiliar city. Coding assistants are edging closer and closer to enabling developers to build apps using human language. Does this mean that we can just fire all of the engineers and have product managers build all of our apps? This week, I got the opportunity to sit down with Ari from GitHub Copilot to discuss the future of coding. Surprisingly, he does not believe that the job of a developer is going away anytime soon.
A product manager is not going to have that level of knowledge. And I don't think even if they ask the AI at this point, that they would get back everything they need to create a full piece of software and the software lifecycle of like, okay, here's the first release of that. What are we doing next? Whereas like someone that's an architect really that understands code and algorithms and coding concepts, that they have that advantage that will still be necessary. I mean, maybe in 50 years we'll be there. I don't think that's in the next 10 to 20 years. I honestly don't believe that.
Please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Your engagement is what makes it possible for me to keep creating these podcasts. And we have some great episodes coming up that tackle topics such as responsible AI and ethics.
This is the OpenAI Changes Everything podcast with your host, Stephen Walther, where we explore how OpenAI is transforming the future of humanity.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I am so excited today because I have Ari LiVigni with me today from GitHub, and we're going to be talking about all of the exciting new GitHub features that, they've been announcing over the last year, but there's been a bunch of them coming out over the last few months, which I think will change coding forever. And so I'm really excited to talk about this because, I've spent most of my life coding. And so it's going to be really interesting to see where this is going. So let me start by saying thank you for being here today. And
yeah,
let me
also
also
for having me. Appreciate it, Stephen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to start by giving a brief bio. Ari is a senior cloud solutions architect on the expert services team at GitHub. His main focus is on AI role prompting with generative AI through GitHub Copilot and Copilot Chat to deliver training and implement GitHub Copilot at scale to customers. When away from the keyboard, he can be found cycling, hiking, playing ultimate frisbee, flying his drone, and coaching lacrosse. Very cool. Awesome. All right. Well, I can't wait to start talking about all the GitHub stuff, but I did want to ask you about your background before we dive into stuff. I know you've been doing this a long time. I know you've worked at a lot of different companies before GitHub. I'm curious. What's your day-to-day look like? What's your, I don't know, what gets you up out of bed in the morning? What gets you excited about going into work? What do you do with GitHub?
I love getting up in the morning to provide guidance to our customers to solve their objectives and goals by using our platform as well as my own personal software goals. I work with a lot of talented and intelligent peers, so I'm always, I'm learning from them. They're learning from me, and that really gets me excited to get up on what's the new challenge, what's the new thing to learn every day. I've been at GitHub now for over 2 years. I started in September of 2022. And I've been using GitHub from before I came to GitHub, from when I was at VMware, Red Hat. And it's just such an intuitive platform. And the features that we introduce constantly always are amazing to see the progress that we make. And I think what I love about GitHub also is that we ship to learn. So a lot of times we'll put a feature out there or something that we're not sure if is 100% hitting the mark or what a customer wants, but we learn from that, we iterate, and then we put it back out there with maybe that new piece that a customer is looking for. And we really do listen to our customers. We're very customer obsessed. So that's what gets me up every day.
That's exciting. So it makes sense for a company that started out with sort of source code develop, source code management and all of that to be very confident about being able to roll back, features that don't work out well, and being extremely agile. I think that's taking agile to a next level where you're actually, trying things out immediately on customers and getting feedback. I remember, I
Good
first
job.
learned about, I was working at Microsoft on the ASP.NET team at the time when I first learned about GitHub. I think I probably opened one of the first repositories on GitHub back in the day, and super excited about it then. And I was really excited when, Microsoft actually acquired GitHub, a few years later. Curious what that looks like now. Do you consider yourself like, do you have a lot of independence, or do you, like, I don't know, go to the Microsoft mothership, or what's that relationship like?
We get our brains get, yeah, no, we
Yeah, that's it.
I would say GitHub is very much its own company. We have the
Uh-huh.
autonomy to drive our platform and the product roadmap. I also have to say that it's kind of an advantage leveraging a larger enterprise company like Microsoft to gain adoption of our platform, and also really maximizing a lot of synergies between the two companies. And I'll give an example. I was just at Microsoft Ignite, and I help out the GitHub accreditation and certification enablement team, which does a lot of our certifications and learnings, applied skills, and things like that. And we work very closely with the Microsoft Learn team, and it was just awesome to see how we had a unified message working together and leveraging a big conference like Microsoft Ignite, where you have like over 10,000 people. And some people are coming up to us like, what is GitHub? I want to know what it is. And so I think that partnership, and I kind of call it a partnership because we learn from them and their products and how we can leverage their products as well, and their Copilot, obviously similar, same names there, but they also really are welcoming to take our ideas and the stuff that we're doing at GitHub. They really do also. I'll say this: they're driving a lot of their customer base off of Azure DevOps onto GitHub platform for development and pushing them more in that direction as time goes on. We've had a lot of migrations in that direction. So I have to say I've had nothing but positive things to say about the merger and them buying us.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great to hear. Um, well, one of the so I'm super interested in how AI is changing coding, but I'm also, I think one of the interesting things about focusing on AI and coding is I think you guys are very much on the cutting edge of how AI is going to influence a lot of different industries moving forward, like healthcare and education and all these different areas where people are still trying to figure out how this technology will integrate with existing practices. And I've been pleasantly surprised by how dramatic and radical some of the changes that you guys are proposing out there. So I really want to get into that stuff, not only to understand, programming, but also like thinking about AI in general, about how it's going to change these different professions. I don't, I mean, maybe it'd be best to like dive right in and start asking you about some of the GitHub projects, but I don't know.
Sure.
I'm also just sort of generally curious about, like, I don't know, like your take on like the transformations happening with AI.
Yeah, I
Massively
did. I
broad
got a chance
question.
actually to
Sorry.
listen, like when it comes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. That's good. I
Yeah.
got to listen to your podcast with Robert Pearl on
Oh,
the CEO of Kaiser. He was early, the former CEO, and I have to say, GitHub Copilot will not solve your health problems, so that's not what we're targeting. But I have to say, I don't think it's going to replace doctors. I feel like it will be an assistant, a tool that they can really diagnose things faster. I was very intrigued by the example he brought up in the podcast about the person that needed their rotator cuff worked on, and that if they had waited longer, it would, it would have, it could have spelled more trouble for them health wise. And I think that's really where these generative AI and AI comes in handy. Is like maybe it's just sitting aside you. Like I've had appointments, doctor's appointments, when they have an assistant that's remotely taking notes while the doctor is talking to me. Well, that's a perfect example of replacing that with AI to do a good analysis and summary of notes and details on specific patient cases. And as we all know, we don't have enough time to get to everything, and a lot of doctors are overloaded with many patients. So I look at it as a tool that they can get diagnosis faster, they can target better, and AI can really comprehend the medical literature much faster than we can to give back those accurate answers and responses. So I find it like it's not going to replace; it's just going to be another tool to help us move faster and help our overall society and community better. That's how I look at it.
Okay, I'm going to push back on that because I'm starting to be
Sure.
convinced. But I think it might help to go through the because I think your own products actually start to push back on that kind of co-pilot relationship. Because one of the things I think that I recently interviewed like an astrophysicist, and she was talking about the of course there's a vast scientific literature, and when talking to Dr. Pearl, I mean, the challenge there is no one on earth can read every medical article. No one on earth can read
Right.
every physics article. And also, I mean, that level of code understanding that we're getting to with AI, I don't know. I mean, let's come back to this at the end because I think
Sure.
you're moving kind of in the direction that is starting to make me question this co-pilot relationship. You're giving me doubts, but maybe we should
Sure.
dive into to the three products.
Yeah.
So I wanted to start by talking about GitHub Copilot. I know that was sort of your first kind of AI coding assistant product. It came out 2021, very early. I know it was, and you guys collaborated very quickly with OpenAI. Um, awesome product. I started using it immediately. Kind of, it was mind blowing at the time because, like, first time I used it, I sat down. I was trying to write a blog aggregator app, and so I said, "Oh, cool! It's like writing functions and automatically writing out all the stuff that I need to be able to pull out, feeds from blogs." But then it started to suggest like blogs I should be pulling into the feed, and then it started, it was like going way beyond sort of like what I expected it to do at the beginning, and that was like, kind of mind blowing for me because it was able to do stuff beyond just sort of like guessing code completion. It was very smart about it. And so I kind of feel like at this point, if a developer doesn't know what GitHub Copilot is, they're probably not a real developer. That's just because it feels like kind of at this point. I mean, so many developers that I talk to are using it out there. It's having such a huge impact. So I'm curious about like do you have like any like data on the impact of GitHub Copilot on coding or on improving coding practices?
Yeah, we've done a study of like 2,000 developers, where we look at productivity holistically. Can they broadly and sustainably about their productivity? We use the space productivity framework to measure that, and that kind of focuses on, I would say, like five main areas of like satisfaction and well-being of developers, performance, activity, communication and collaboration, and efficiency and flow, and really measuring that maybe at the individual, the team or group, or the overall system or company level. And we've done that study that I think really kind of gets to the heart, because I think measuring how the impact of GitHub Copilot on developers is a hard thing to solve. And by using this space productivity framework, which is out there and anyone can look it up, they can really get to the source of like, okay, these are really measurable both quantity and qualitative measurements that we can understand. Oh, there really is a huge impact here to our development community, and I think that's a great thing to use as a source of reference. And maybe other companies want to take that space productivity framework and use it at their own company to see like, okay, are we seeing the same kind of results here as well?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess it is tricky whenever you have these things because, there's sort of like productivity gains, but there's also just sort of quality of life gains as a developer with a better experience as a developer, which makes a big difference as well. And just to be clear, I've only used so I've used GitHub Copilot with VS Code, which is kind of my go-to editor. But
Mhm.
it's not VS Code specific, right? You can use it with other development environments as well.
No, yeah, yeah, I'm a VS Code fan as well. I'll freely admit that I use that. It also is the code space. If you're aware of it, that's the environment that we have in code spaces. But Copilot itself, the code suggestion part of it, is available in Azure Data Studio, all the JetBrains IDEs, Vim, NeoVim, Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, and now Xcode. Copilot
Nice.
Chat, yeah, we now it's actually Xcode Universe. Copilot Chat is available in JetBrains IDEs, Visual Studio, and Visual Studio Code as well. And that chat feature, I think, is kind of a game changer when we talk
Yeah.
about having a conversation with coding back and forth, inserting files and generating a whole workspace of an application. That's really where Copilot Chat kind of really helps out there.
Nice. And I know you just did a number of announcements at GitHub Universe. I guess that was what, 3 or 4 months ago now. And I know you said you just came from Ignite. Um, I was one of the, well, I should ask you, there were a lot of exciting stuff. What was your kind of favorite announcement around GitHub Copilot?
I love that we expanded on our models. I know like a lot of folks think, well, Microsoft has this partnership with OpenAI and we're just going to stick with these OpenAI models. But at the end of the day, we want to give our end users the ability to use any of these models that are available. And some of them may meet more of their goals than others. So why not open that up to Claude or to Gemini like we did in that announcement, as well as some of the other open AI models like O1 Mini as well as O1 Preview, I believe. So I think that's something that was exciting to me because before we made some of these announcements, we really only access to a couple of the open AI models, even the bleeding edge ones that me as an internal user, I only had availability to certain ones of these models. So I think that was just a great announcement that we made.
Yeah, I mean, it was super surprising, right? Because I thought, as you were saying that you'd stick with the Microsoft models, but yeah, it was very exciting because I've heard, people out there right now are playing with Claude, they're playing with, Sonnet, and different people have. So I mean, are you imagining that people will use different models? I know there's a nice little drop down now where you can pick which model you want to use when you're using GitHub Copilot. Are you imagining
Yeah.
that people will use different models for different types of projects, or is it more like people will have sort of preferences for one overall, using Claude over OpenAI?
Yeah, I honestly think they will use different models. In fact, if you go to the GitHub Marketplace, you'll see there's a little models thing there where you can actually play around in a playground with different models, and they have all types of like Cohere, Meta, Minstrel, and you can use different capabilities as far as chat completion, embeddings. Or maybe they're tag. We also have a drop down for tags. So maybe you're interested in agents or conversation or RAG or reasoning, and you can play around with models there. And I honestly think ultimately we are going to give all the choices to the end user to make their best judgment on what they want to use given the task at hand. Some companies may have a need for using multiple different models depending on what the task at hand has to be completed.
That makes sense. And I thought that model thing that you're talking about was very cool. I took a look at some of the videos for that where you can compare like different models side by side and give them prompts and then compare the
Yeah.
speed that the models are coming out with their results and compare the quality and figure out, hey, I can get away with this cheaper model over here because it's pretty much as good as the more expensive one. I thought that was a nice feature. Well, one of the other things I wanted to ask about is so enterprise sort of, engineering is very different from startup engineering. I've worked at both startups and in large enterprises like Microsoft and Indeed. And a lot of programming in an enterprise is really making, incremental changes to vast existing systems where there's a bunch of, internal homegrown code where you're just, modifying it to do something else. And there's lots of like, you know, uh, rules about how you do it and frameworks and all that. And so one of the things I've sort of concerned about Copilot in the past is how well, because if it goes out and generates code, is it going to use like, a lot of companies have their own like identity framework that they're using internally, or logging system, or performance analysis system. And, I was curious. I believe that you had some announcements around like that as well, about giving companies more control over the code that was being
The
generated.
fine tune models announcement.
Yeah, fine-tune models. And also I think you had this
Yeah.
stuff about instructions too, which the custom instructions, which might help. I don't know. I'm not sure if that will help, but those both sound
Yeah,
like
yes. Yeah, so we have the fine-tuned models where I look at that as really a proprietary language. Like I have a buddy who works at a company, and they have their own language that they've developed that isn't
yeah,
out there at all, and they
yeah,
could use something like our fine-tuned model to really target their enterprise. And then when you get into the customizations, I think the features we've added there around indexing repositories, like you mentioned, custom instructions, where in the root of a repository, you can have just like a .gitignore file, you can have a Copilot instructions MD file that says like these are the things that we're interested in when it comes to returning feedback back to the end user in a chat or a code suggestion, and those specific instructions, and you can do it on a repository by repository basis.
oh,
I
nice.
would say the other cool thing, not to kind of go a little bit off a tangent here, is the stuff that we're doing around extensions of extending GitHub Copilot, so you could write your own extension to work inside of your IDE, so
Mm.
developers could ask about your own code base. Well, now we've introduced a newer one that was post universe called Skill Sets, which is a little bit easier to set up, not as robust, but very easy to kind of stand up. And I think that really creates the picture of, well, whatever our developers, whether they're IT, they're developing our software or their security, we have all the answers for you, whether it's through the IDE or through the github.com platform, to be able to customize and give you those specific things back to you that are customized. And I think that's where we stand apart, I think, from Cursor or even OpenAI Canvas, that our ecosystem at this point is so all encompassing. It's hard to kind of like you want to be in it. You want to be
Right.
immersed in it because of the feature set.
Right. Yeah. No, and I think, I mean, as people are using Copilot, again, sort of enterprise scenarios, this stuff is going to become incredibly important because of all the rules for, and makes a lot of sense. I'm glad you mentioned, Cursor. I was going to bring up Cursor and Canvas and even Devon. I guess those are the other sort of things floating around in people's minds right now around AI assisted coding. And so, yeah, I was curious how you thought about. There's been a lot of excitement around Cursor recently because it's a sort of AI first development environment. It's a fork of VS
Yeah.
Code, and they do. I watched the Lex Friedman had a podcast episode where he interviewed the Cursor team recently, and they were bragging about how tab 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 you can build applications. And then, of course, there's OpenAI and Canvas, and they have some now, that opens up a separate window. You can put code in there. You can highlight sections and have it help you debug stuff. And Devon, which I was surprised OpenAI was promoting so much, but they were promoting at their last big announcement
Mm.
around using Devon as a, almost like a virtual programmer that you can pull in and you can assign, like issues to, and it'll go off and program it. So I was curious about, I mean, how do you think of like GitHub Copilot fitting into this, this increasingly competitive landscape? And what's the special sauce that makes you different from all these other approaches?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I have played around with the cursor a bit, and I did find, I think before Universe, they maybe were a little bit ahead with certain feature sets or things that they offered. But post Universe, I would say like we are beyond them now. I would say the thing that sets us apart from some of these others is that it's really all integrated into our platform of what you can use it for, whether, and I think it answers, it provides solutions to all personas, whether you're a security officer at your company, you're IT and you're rolling out infrastructure as code, you're a developer, you're a project manager. All of this is integrated into our platform, and Copilot is a piece of all of that. Like, even I'll give an example. Like, what I love is we announced, and even before Universe, was the security aspect of Copilot doing security fixes, and we have the saying of found means fixed, means now developers don't have to waste their time fixing these vulnerabilities. They're automatically put out as a PR and maybe automatically committed as code at that point, obviously going through some tests and checks. But that to me is an all encompassing solution for any organization that's out there. While as I think some of these other platforms, at least right now, are only targeting developers specifically. And I
Mhm.
think that leaves others behind where we are not doing that.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Well, so I wanted to ask, so, everyone who's not using GitHub Copilot should be. I don't know whether or not. But I wanted to move over, and this is, and GitHub Copilot, I think of as kind of like, if you're a traditional programmer, or as you said, some of these other roles that you have, you should be using it. It makes a lot of sense. But I mean, one of the areas I'm excited about was there were announcements at the last GitHub Universe around GitHub Copilot Workspace, and I wanted to ask you about that. If you can give like a quick overview of what is GitHub Copilot Workspace, and how's this a different approach than using GitHub Copilot?
Yeah, I would say the workspace part is really like putting a plan together from start to finish, and it could be on an existing code base that already exists, or it could be a greenfield, a brand new. Like, I'm starting out a new project, a new repository, but it allows you to drive through the issue mechanism in GitHub.com, really devise a plan and coming up with and start to generate code just from an issue. So you may have an idea and a plan of, like, here's an epic of all the software that we want to produce for this feature. Here's the subtasks, and now go off and develop me some code around that. And then maybe I want to then bring that into a code space to then continue to develop. The other cool thing is you can share that workspace that you're working on with your peers, and send them that link to that code, to that workspace, to be able to use that. So I find it, not only for the development community, but maybe you're a product manager and you're like, here's the next stuff on the roadmap we have to work on, and here's the high notes that we have to hit, for this feature to really hit home for our customers. Let me start off an issue and use the workspace to plan all that out of, well, I have to generate other issues that this developer may work on. I have to have an overall plan and the deliverables on when they're going to be complete. And that's really where I think workspace comes into play. So it's really more beyond the developer, and it is, I think, can be targeted at existing code bases, so new features in a code base, or a greenfield if you want to start from scratch as well.
Got it. I mean, so your CEO was pretty dramatic about it when he talked about it at GitHub Universe. I think he used the phrase at one point, he wants to create, what, 1 billion developers, which is, a lot. I've heard
Yes.
other people say, I think I've heard you say you want to create 8 billion developers with it, the population of the earth. And so that's a pretty, I've also heard, I think the CEO talking about how it makes English the programming language of the future, or not specifically English, but human language, I should say, because it's also, supports Indonesian and Hindi and whatever language. Is
Yep.
that is that overhyped? Or, well, I'm putting you in a bad position. You can't say the opposite of your CEO, but I mean,
No.
but is that like short term? Is that something that you're really? I mean, that is, because that's pretty dramatic. Because my understanding of the idea of GitHub Workspace is it's really, so GitHub Copilot is more like assisting developers doing development in the legacy way to make them incredibly more productive. But GitHub Workspace feels more like a paradigm
Mhm.
shift where you're saying, hey, You can start by just defining your user stories and then breaking them into tasks or whatever, and then it will do all the programming. And so you don't have to, touch that, confusing, ugly code stuff. You could, stick in your favorite human language and actually generate code. Is that the vision for this thing, or am I getting sort of too caught up in some of the
Yeah,
promotional
I
stuff?
would say I would say what it means, and this actually goes for Copilot Chat as well as Workspace, is
Okay.
it comes down to how you're prompting the AI. I really think prompt engineering, or the art of prompting, is where we're headed. Still using the English language or whatever language, but fine tuning what you're asking the AI to get those responses. And that's the same in Workspace as it would be in Copilot Chat. And I'll give an example. I did a sandbox session at Universe where we developed an app using the AI, using Copilot Chat to develop a OctoFit trainer app, like for working out, as an
Nice.
example. And
Yeah.
when I initially started with that project, I was very like a loose, like, here's a couple ideas I jotted down in Copilot Chat, would work the same in Workspace as well. But what I learned from that is, well, give the overall goal, but then really target, let's think step by step on, here's the tasks that I want to complete, the order I want to complete them in. And also in a couple of places, I gave examples of what I wanted that code to look like. So I think we shift from this, like, I got to be a really hardcore developer, to now I can just talk about in English language, but give the AI a lot of information, especially where we're going, where the LLMs can handle a larger token size, that we can really now have high school students or people that have never touched programming at all really take their ideas from just an idea to really to code at the end of it. And I think Workspace, the differentiation there, I would say, is more around like project or product management of, here's where we're starting for this feature or this new piece of software, and these are the specific things that I need in it, and I'm going to tell the AI to do that so that it knows to respond accordingly.
Okay, let me try to echo back to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. But it sounds like what you're saying
Sure.
is it's less of a dramatic kind of dividing line between, GitHub Copilot and Workspace that I'm talking about. Because you're saying even within like GitHub Copilot, if you're using the Copilot chat, you can still sort
In
of
the
drive
chat, yeah.
things. Yeah, you can drive things using prompts. You can do prompt engineering in human language to be able to drive things. The real difference between sort of GitHub Copilot and the workspaces, or GitHub Copilot workspaces, Workspace is really set up where you start, to traditional product management. You create your issues, it gets broken down, you can share that. And so it's more like this is sort of like a product management interface. But what kind of makes it interesting is potentially it can also do the extra step of now not only creating all these issues, but actually generating the code for you automatically as well once you have the workspace. Am I
Right.
capturing that? Okay. Okay.
And
And let me
no,
ask you,
I think
oh,
that's
sorry, go
spot
ahead.
on. And yeah, sure.
Oh, no,
I
sorry.
was just
Go,
going to
go ahead.
say, in addition to that, in addition to that, it's also like really integrated, like Workspace is integrated into our ecosystem of using issues, PRs, merges, and maybe you get it to the point where I've kind of doctored up what I want even in some code, and I'm handing that off to another developer to maybe keep diving deeper into that solution.
Okay, so that makes sense. So if I'm using VS Code and Jira, then I probably wouldn't use Workspace. I would go ahead and use GitHub Copilot. But if I want to take advantage of all of the kind of,
Right.
goodness from GitHub, if I want to dive into that whole into your issue system and all that, then GitHub Workspace is for me. That's where I should be starting with.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Exactly.
All right, one last product before we get into the scary philosophical issues. Spark, that was another thing that was, announced. I spent some time looking at the
Yes.
Spark, website. So tell me about Spark. What is GitHub Spark?
I think it's for everyone, not just developers, and not also being in our ecosystem. It allows you to create micro apps that take like that crazy small fun idea and kind of bring it to life. And actually, what I did, it was funny. So I actually at GitHub Universe ended up working some of the Copilot booth area that we had in the main floor of one of the hangars there, and I got to use Spark for the first time. So I actually took our sandbox session uh, software goal or problem that we are trying to solve, and I used GitHub Spark to also do that, and it was very quickly able to develop not only my idea into code, but have a data set to test it out. And I think what it allows is, when you hear the expression, there's an app for that, now really maybe everyone can develop apps using something like GitHub Spark, or maybe add on to existing apps that normally people are shy away from because it looks just too daunting or too complex to do. So I think that's kind of where like Spark is like sparking your idea of just an idea that you have and then really carrying it out to maybe a little small app that you want to develop.
Got it. And my understanding is, and correct me here if I'm wrong, but the real sort of like main use case for Spark right now are more like casual apps, kind of apps that you would find on your iPhone, things like because my
Yes.
understanding is what it does in the background is it has its own runtime. It uses React JS to create like a progressive web app, and so it's great. I saw all the samples like Minesweeper, and my son was talking about for some reason he wants to create a competitive cooking application and where he can share photos of things they're cooking with his friends and I said, oh well, that sounds like maybe that could be a Spark app. Is that the right way to think of it? It's more like kind of a this isn't
Yeah.
really
And,
for
and you bring up
enterprise.
kids,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah. It's not really, I think it really is targeted what you're saying of like, like when we're kids or your kid, like you brought up, right? Like we have these crazy ideas of like, oh, well, I like this app that I saw on my iPhone or my Android device, but I really kind of want this app to do this other stuff too. Well, I
Right.
can use Spark to develop that and have its, like you said, like it has its React JS runtime. It can develop that for you. And I think that's really where it's targeted at. And that's why it's not called GitHub Copilot Spark. It's called GitHub Spark because it's completely separated from that product line. So I would say you're spot on with where or what you're saying it's targeted at.
Okay, awesome. So this has been super valuable to me because I've been trying to like fit these different sort of announced new products and features together and try to figure out where they work in my mind. But it sounds like GitHub Copilot still does everything if you need to do things. If you want to use the GitHub ecosystem, use a GitHub workspace. If you want to quickly build, a no-code app that's sort of a progressive web app, then use Spark to do that. Is that okay? All right. So
Yeah,
now we get
I
into the
think it's a good
scary
summary.
philosophical issues. My favorite part. So I know the CEO of Google recently announced in their earnings report that over 25% of their code now is AI generated, not reviewed, but it's generated by AI. And so I also know my niece just graduated. She got a degree in computer science. Should she be scared, and should developers be scared? Because it feels like again, coding is being transformed. The AIs are out there writing code left and right. Is this going to fundamentally change? Like, would if your son or daughter was about to embark on a computer science degree, would you say, maybe not, maybe pivot a little, or how are you thinking about this?
Yeah, so I get this question a lot from our own customers,
I'm sure
and
you do.
I even had conversations at GitHub Universe with several
Yeah.
people about this. And I really look at GitHub Copilot as a tool to help developers learn faster, remove barriers, and increase their development velocity. At the end of the day, right, we're constantly increasing our speed of how we do everything in our lives, and I think that's where something like GitHub Copilot comes in to do that. I also equate it to like when the internet came along in the 90s, right? Like we weren't like, okay, we're all done here. We have what we need. It's we use it as a tool to get to an end result. And now I think the generative AI that GitHub Copilot offers is that next step of that. And it perhaps even opens the door maybe for younger developers or people interested in just getting into software development that maybe not would not have before, now feel more comfortable because they have this assistant alongside of them to now develop some code. So I honestly think it may have the opposite effect of creating more of a development community. I see what the CEO of Google said, and yes, it will be there to maybe generate boilerplate code and some of the mundane or repetitive tasks that we all hate doing, regex expressions and becoming experts in that, or
Trust me, I've met
all that
people at
sort of stuff.
Microsoft who just love doing regex expressions nonstop.
They love it. Right.
It thrills them. They get up, they want to write some regex. So anyway, people are
It's what
very
gets them
different.
up in the morning, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. So, whatever.
I mean, now even like with GitHub Copilot, right? We not only do I have the ability now GitHub Copilot to generate my code, but with some of the recent innovations we've made, not only do I have a peer to review it, I can have Copilot review my code and find my spelling mistakes, find my grammar mistakes, fix my coding, my function names, make them uniform and consistent. Like that to me is something that if you can do that before you're even committing code, you're finding that issue sooner, which means that it's cheaper to fix overall, and your velocity is much faster. Your quality is better. The quantity of code you're putting out is more. So I would say it's just going to help developers in the long run. It's not going to replace developers. That's how I look at it. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I really don't think that's the case looking forward.
I so I just want to highlight that feature you're talking about because I saw some videos on that where you can get an
Yeah.
immediate you create a PR. One of your code reviewers is
Yeah.
Mr. AI,
Yeah.
and they
Copilot. Yeah.
yeah Copilot, and they immediately give a review of your code, which I think is awesome. I think that's great to be able to get that feedback immediately, even before other team members on the code you're writing. I guess, but
I actually
yeah
used it the other day sorry, I used it the other day with a peer of mine. He generated some code. I was reviewing it, and Copilot came back right away with like some commas that should have been in place, or there's an extra space here, or just subtle
yeah
things like that in the code, or comments in the code that were not uniform that I
right.
probably would have missed with my naked eye. But Copilot's going to catch it because it sees the conformity of the code and what it should return as a response. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's
no,
it's a great feature.
that's great stuff. And yeah, but I guess I'm asking the more aggressive question because you're promoting
Mhm.
right now this idea that natural language, human language, can be used through prompt engineering to do coding. I know there's this idea with Spark apps. I was very interested in this idea that was floating around how it's more app centric development than code centric because what you're doing is you're actually, very, very quickly generating new apps. And I think in the case of Spark, they even like Dolly, they give you variations of the app where you can pick your favorite and do things like that. But I
Mhm.
mean, it's still very there's this sort of like I don't know. I got the feeling from the GitHub Universe announcements that there was this certain vision of in the future unlocking programming for everyone by making it something that you can do in your, in your spoken language in Hindi or English or whatever. And that's a pretty dramatic shift. And, of course, I'm thinking of, I remember the shift from everyone used to write SQL, then they start writing in ORMs. And so they didn't write SQL code anymore. They did a
Mhm.
higher level. And I guess that's also, I used to write in assembly back in the 1980s. I'd do call negative 151 and drop into assembly on my Apple II and write. And then it was like,
Right.
whoa, you can do this in Turbo Pascal. This is awesome. But I mean, there is that progression to higher and higher levels of abstractions. And it feels like we're kind of on the cusp of this next level of abstraction where you don't have to learn Python or C sharp or whatever, or Java. You can just write directly in English and be able to express an intent. And I guess the other part of this is, I've worked with a lot of developers, very different levels of experience. And for especially a lot of like, sort of like junior developers when they're coming in, it's massively confusing, all the different files, especially if you have a modern web app with, React going on and on the front end and the back end, you have special Java classes and all these different files interacting with all these different languages. And then you have all these settings files. I mean, it's hard. It's hard being a developer. And so the level of
The
the
struggle
level
is
of
real.
understanding is sometimes, I mean, often if you're a junior developer, you're starting with little parts of it that you can understand. And a lot of it is, a big black box that over time you're learning more and more about. And so I guess I'm wondering if there's a certain point where we'll just say, all programming languages are actually just lower level stuff, like the plumbing that people won't interact with anymore. And that for a lot of people, so let me, I'm sorry, that was a long sort of context thing, but do you think there's going to be a point where we just fire all the developers and just have product managers do everything? Because, there's a point where it's really a lot of application development is getting clear about the intent of what you want to build rather than in English, rather than getting into the nitty gritty of writing code and understanding React classes and all the stuff that goes into coding a modern web application.
Yeah, I mean, I see it in a way that generative AI really gets better, and GitHub Copilot adds more features. It will allow engineers and product managers to increase their velocity. I would say the thing too is I don't think that it'll ever be replaced. Like for senior developers or architects, they still have that knowledge that of really what they're trying to solve, and this and a system wide like application that they really need a system architecture to design. I think it replaces those mundane tasks or the boilerplate stuff, or the kind of low hanging fruit that we have. So I don't think it replaces the need to code. I think it just allows them to code at more complex levels and more of the intricate things. And when you bring up junior developers, I look at it as Copilot and generative AI in general is, well, you have a new developer that comes on board. Maybe he's fresh out of college. He doesn't know your code base.
Right.
He's going to have to sit with a senior developer or junior developer to learn that. Well, now you can have Copilot explain this code base to me. Explain this whole repository. What is this doing? What is this function, this class doing? Whereas before, that's taking up a human being's time to explain that. And now we have the ability to kind of give that time back to that senior developer to think of the next great idea, the next big thing. And really, at the end of the day, those senior developers, a product manager is not going to have that level of knowledge. And I don't think even if they ask the AI at this point, that they would get back everything they need to create a full piece of software, and the software lifecycle of like, okay, here's the first release of that. What are we doing next? Whereas like someone that's an architect really that understands code and algorithms and coding concepts, that they have that advantage that will still be necessary. I mean, maybe in 50 years we'll be there. I don't think that's in the next 10 to 20 years. I honestly don't believe that.
Okay, got it. So you think people will still be learning Java and C sharp, and they'll still be coding directly in it? So
Or
probably,
Go, yeah.
or
Yes.
whatever your favorite language is, um, and or
Yeah.
TypeScript, and so that probably won't change anytime soon. So there'll still be a practice of learning these things. So my niece should be reassured that she should be happy for a computer
Yes.
science degree, which would
She's
be
safe.
reassuring
Yeah.
to her. She's safe. Okay, good. Um, but over time, that I agree that one of the cool things about using AI is it's not like a one-way street. You get educated when you're using it. And one of the cool things about, especially when you're interacting with Copilot chat, is all of this explanation that you're getting back and forth, and the reviews, and explain what the hell is this code doing, and it will explain it to you. It'll explain what
Mm.
it's doing, or make suggestions. So that all makes sense. Um, I- yeah, I guess the only thing that gives me pause is, again, it feels like the easiest thing to do in the world is to, once you start relying on, I always think of like in The Simpsons. It turns out in one episode of The Simpsons, it turns out that you learn Homer doesn't actually have any control over the nuclear reactor. He's hitting all the buttons, but it's actually another guy. And which, for good reason, you don't really want
Right.
Homer controlling.
You don't
and
want
and
Homer doing that.
yeah, yeah, and I have to wonder if we'll get into a similar situation, especially given the complexity of code now, where it's just easier to defer to the judgment of the AI, and what this co-pilot relationship means when you have a co-pilot who has read all of the code for your organization, knows every programming language, is able to generate things so quickly and understand the relationship between documents, probably beyond in certain ways, not every way, but in certain specific ways, I mean, AI is better than humans because it can hold, all of these relationships that humans can't do. And I guess, I mean, I understand your skepticism about sort of AI taking over the show, but at the same time, I mean, you mentioned Robert Pearl and the whole diagnoses thing, but at a certain point, he was expressing skepticism. He kept reminding us of the fact that doctors mess up all the time. They're really, they're not
Yeah.
super reliable, and in fact, AI might be able to do it better than doctors long term, just because they have every these vast knowledge bases that they can rely on. So I guess I feel a little conflicted about it, because I feel like if we're going through this very rapid transformation of coding, which you're responsible for. You're part of the, GitHub Copilot is definitely, transforming the way people code. And in some ways, as you say, it's good to open up coding to all these people who aren't necessarily, don't have a computer science degree. That's super valuable, and coding becomes more like prompt engineering. And so, and I don't know. So maybe the coding world will just become fragmented between different ways that people go around about writing code. But I don't know. I guess I'm still. It sounds like you're still very optimistic about this Copilot relationship, about traditional coding. Coders probably won't be replaced anytime soon. And I don't know. I guess I
Yeah.
still feel a little skeptical about it.
I think also, like, there's so much software out there already
Yeah.
that we need Copilot. Like in the case of like legacy apps, of updating those apps into a newer language. I still think you need a cap. I mean, at the end of the day, it is called Copilot for a reason, because you're the captain. You're kind of leading the charge
Right.
on what you're developing and driving in a direction. I think it's only as good as who's prompting it or who's giving it that direction, and that still will be needed. I'm not saying like in 50 years that might not be the case, but I think for the next 10 to 20 years, we're still going to need developers to really, maybe that job changes in 50 years. But at this moment now, I feel like students, your niece, people, like anyone should actually, if they're interested in getting into coding, they should be using something like GitHub Copilot to help drive their ideas or their software goals. And it's only going to make them better developers overall. And I'll give like I mentioned, this OctoFit tracker app that I developed. I knew nothing about React or MongoDB. I knew about Django and Python. I was aware of that. I've used it in the past, but I had not used MongoDB and React. And it filled that void for me very quickly in taking me to where I wanted to get to without having to now read a bunch of documentation, do some, Stack Overflow searches
Right.
or things like that. And I think that's where, the target is right now. Maybe in the future, just like for Dr. Pearl, maybe it'll be better than doctors. I think it just helps alleviate some of the time constraints that we all have in our lives, from developers to doctors to whatever the profession may be, that maybe we wouldn't be able to do without it.
Awesome. Well, this has been super interesting. I appreciate your time today. I want to thank you. So two questions. Number one, I
Sure.
mean, were you excited about where's GitHub going next? Where are you excited about working on next on GitHub?
I mean, I'm constantly excited about the Copilot story in general. I would say the features that we put out are constantly, they're iterating so fast we can't even keep up with the content. We have to constantly updating our content. I have to say the docs
I
team
know.
for GitHub does an exceptional job of really updating the docs, so then when we are delivering trainings to customers on the new features, we have accurate information of what it does. Um, I'm very excited too, because I get to work with folks in the engineering team directly. If I have a question, I want to deep dive on a feature, I can do that. So I'm excited to see what we do next in the space, from the chat in IDEs in GitHub.com. I'm really looking forward to our progression there. I think we're just scratching the surface on what GitHub Copilot and our that product can do today. and the extensibility of it as well.
Awesome. And what's the best way if people want to keep up on all this stuff? Is there a website they should go to? Are there videos
Yeah,
they
I
should
would
watch?
say, yeah. They can go to the YouTube GitHub channel, but I also recommend you can do an RSS feed or off of X as well. Our change log, and you can
Mhm.
actually do specific labels for Copilot, Copilot Chat, Copilot Business, or Copilot Enterprise, and that allows you to keep up to date. Because almost every day there's something new coming out. So if you want to know, like, oh, this just popped in here as a preview, it's coming down the road, I can make my company for my own personal software development, I can make myself aware. I highly recommend following our change log and specifically the Copilot label, because you'll get a lot of great up-to-date information on what's coming down. And definitely check out our GitHub Copilot docs. Our docs team does just an exceptional job on keeping that up to date and giving examples and links to where you need to go to use Copilot in an effective way.
That's exciting. Thank you again. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Take care, Stephen.
Thank you for joining us for the OpenAI Changes Everything podcast, where we explore how OpenAI is transforming the future of humanity. Please remember to subscribe to ensure that you receive future episodes.